Welcome back and thanks for staying with us here on Zoom In. Now, it's a major deal that, if it comes to fruition, could change the Middle East as we know it. The US-Saudi agreement, which as part of that would include a normalization deal between Jerusalem and Riyadh and possible concessions for the Palestinians. I-24 News on Tuesday was the first to publish that the US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken will visit Saudi Arabia and Morocco during the third week of October following his trip to Israel to advance such discussions. But now, for the first time since the negotiations began some 5 months ago, the Hezbollah Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah is adding his 2 cents, calling the possible deal dangerous and saying that Hezbollah and Lebanon will denounce any country that signs a normalization agreement with the Zionist enemy. Here's more from the head of the Lebanese terror group.
Any country that might sign a normalization agreement must be condemned, and its actions must be denounced, because it is a very dangerous step and a stab in the back of the Palestinian people, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Christian and Muslim holy sites, and an abandonment of Palestine.
Now, to really dive into this and discuss it in more depth, I'm joined here in studio by Ambassador Yoram Ettinger, a former Israeli ambassador and an expert on US-Israel relations and the Middle East. And with us from Jerusalem is Avi Melamed, the founder and CEO of Inside the Middle East Intelligence Perspectives and a Middle East expert as well. Gentlemen, thank you both very much for joining me this afternoon. Lots to tackle, but Avi, I'd like to start with you. The I-24 News report that Blinken will be visiting Saudi Arabia as well as Morocco. Why is this the case? Morocco is not necessarily a key player in these accords. We know that he's coming to visit the region to speak to Israelis and Palestinians as well. Why Morocco?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily associate or connect the story of Saudi Arabia with Morocco. Indeed, Morocco is part of the Abraham Accords. And by the way, there are things going on between Morocco and Israel. Some of them are more positive, some of them are more controversial in a way. But I wouldn't necessarily associate or connect the two issues of Saudi Arabia and Morocco in the context of the Israeli-Saudi normalization.
And Yoram, your take?
Well, Morocco is a key player in the context of the Abraham Accord. Morocco is a key player in the war on Islamic terrorism, and Morocco is a key player in trying to curb the Iranians' surge into North Africa, which is a clear and real danger to Europe, the rest of Africa, and therefore also to the USA.
Speaking of dangers and concerns, we just heard the Hezbollah chief Hassan Nasrallah saying that he considers a potential deal to be dangerous. Why would Hezbollah be concerned about Saudi Arabia and Israel making peace more so than the countries that Israel has already signed with the Abraham Accords?
Well, Hezbollah echoes the voice of its master, which is the Ayatollah's regime in Iran. And here, I think, lies the major problem, because at this stage, the #1 hurdle on the road towards Saudi-Israeli accord, normalization or peace, is the U.S. State Department. The U.S. State Department insistence on the diplomatic option on Iran has pushed the Saudis closer to China and therefore pushed the Saudis closer to a nuclear option. Without a U.S. diplomatic option, with the U.S. adapting the regime change option or the military option against Iran, the Saudis would not be that concerned about the nuclear option. In addition, the U.S. State Department has been a major obstacle traditionally due to its own worldview, which looks upon the Palestinian issue as if it is a central element in the Arab context, in the Middle East context, in the Israeli-Arab context, all of which has absolutely nothing to do with reality.
Avi, do you tend to agree? Is the U.S. State Department the biggest obstacle here in a deal that would involve both Saudi Arabia, the United States, Israel, and possibly the Palestinians?
I wouldn't necessarily describe it as an obstacle. Look, we got today 3 players to this game. You got the United States of America, Biden administration, you got Israel, Netanyahu government, and you got Saudi Arabia, particularly Mohammed bin Salman. Each one of them has its own calculation and interest in this very complicated game. So for the time being, when I look at the whole picture, I would say that bin Salman, in comparison to Biden and Netanyahu, has a largest breath capacities and a bigger maneuvering capacities. Because as I've been saying all along the way for a long period of time, Saudi Arabia is not going to drop this card of normalization. And by the way, the Saudis don't like the word normalization. They call it integration in the context of relationship with Israel. They're not going to waste that card for nothing. They do have a very clear expectations from the Biden administration, and they were very clear about it. Now, the Biden administration, we all know, is trying to achieve that achievement, particularly as the Biden administration is heading an election campaign next year. And when we are talking about Netanyahu, we have to understand and remember, of course, that Netanyahu is basically tuned to its own very right-wing extreme government, which obviously will oppose any kind of concessions to the Palestinians. So there are many obstacles that each and every partner of this triangle is facing. And one more thing about the Palestinians. I do agree definitely with former Ambassador Ettinger about the whole issue of the way that the world looks at the story of the Middle East and the Palestinian is basically the upside down. It's the Middle East that shapes the trajectory of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. That being said, we have to take into consideration that up until now, leaving aside Iran and the Hezbollah, who is clearly and very expectedly are opposing this whole process, Hamas was the one within the Palestinian that already makes some sort of like a hinted statement, basically expressing its resentment for vis-a-vis such a possible arrangement. One of the key questions that we have to ask ourselves, and it's an open question, is what going to be the ramifications and implications within the Palestinian arena, both in the context of the Palestinian Authority as well as in the context of Hamas? This is a key question that we have to follow very closely.
Absolutely, and more key questions because there's so many moving parts here. But gentlemen, stay with us because I do want your analysis on a separate angle here. Yesterday, being Monday, marked the second ever official visit by an Israeli minister to Saudi Arabia. Communications Minister Shlomo Karhi landed in Riyadh to lead an Israeli delegation invited to attend a conference. Karhi, who was accompanied by Knesset's Economic Committee Chairman David Bitan, made the trip less than a week after his Likud colleague Chaim Katz became the first Israeli minister to officially visit the kingdom. Now, their visits come as Israel and Saudi Arabia, as we've been talking about, edge closer to a possible agreement to normalize or to integrate relations.
Time for joy. We have now landed in Riyadh, the capital of Saudi Arabia, an official delegation authorized by Prime Minister Netanyahu to call for peace. We are here on Sukkot for an international conference. We will meet with representatives from around the world and promote peace between the State of Israel and Saudi Arabia.
Everything starts with small steps. The State of Israel and global peace in the Middle East.
And still with me here in studio is Ambassador Yoram Ettinger, and with us from Jerusalem, Avi Melamed, two esteemed Middle East experts. Ambassador, I'd like to start with you. The analysis that you have on the official Israeli visits to Saudi Arabia recently, are they actual positive steps? We heard Avi bringing up, obviously, the political and the diplomatic angle to this and what each side gets out of it. But is it just for show? We're talking about the communications, the tourism manager. What other sectors could be impacted here?
The unprecedented expansion of Saudi-Israeli cooperation militarily and commercially during the last few years underscores the well-documented fact that the Crown Prince, MBS, considers Israel a critical, not just another element, but a critical element in his grand design, the vision of 2030. He views Israel as the most credible ally against the threat of the Ayatollahs and against the threat of the Muslim Brotherhood. He does not trust the USA. He does not trust NATO. He does not trust trust any of the Arab countries. Israel is the most trusted so-called life insurance agent for the Saudis in the Middle East. Secondly, the Crown Prince is well aware that energy-reliant economy may be wiped out in the next few years due to the advance of science and technology. He wants to diversify the economy, and he considers Israel, especially its technology, to be an ideal partner for Saudi Arabia. So the Saudis don't do any favor to Israel by signing an accord. They're not driven by political reasons. They don't care much about election in the US or election in Israel. They're driven by Saudi interests, which are well served by the unique capabilities of Israel.
Absolutely. And Avi, I'd like to get your point of view just quickly in the last few minutes that we have left. Both of these ministers came from Netanyahu's more moderately Likud party. Was that intentional, do you think? Or is it perhaps trying to take away from the point that his more hardline ministers of the religious Zionism and Jewish power parties should not at this stage be engaging with Saudi Arabia?
Well, look, this is the less important part of the story. I mean, MBS and the Saudis' agenda is not dictated by that politician or another politician. They are dictated by long-term strategic interest. And in that context, as Ettinger said, Ambassador Ettinger said, this is indeed, Israel is viewed as a very valuable strategic card for the Saudis. Here is something I think that's important to look when we're looking at MBS in Saudi Arabia in the region at all. One of the most interesting things about MBS' recent interview to Fox News was the statement that he did not make, and he did not mention the two-state solution. There is a reason for it. It's actually a double message from MBS to the world and to the region. One message is to the American administration and Netanyahu, basically saying, look, I give you a space of maneuvering. I'm not going to lie on the fence over the story of the two-state solution. And the other thing which it's not less important, MBS is positioning himself to be the upcoming biggest leader of the Arab world. He is now positioning himself to be as a source of inspiration for the young generation. He's leading this reform, this dramatic reform in Saudi Arabia. He's leading this whole vision of 2030. He's doing a big reform, a big changes. And this is part of this move. In other words, when Mohammed bin Salman, in interview to Fox News, did not deliberately, and this is not by chance, did not mention the two-state solution, he basically signaled to the Middle East the following message. I, Mohammed bin Salman, I'm not subdued to the regular mantras and concepts. I, Mohammed bin Salman, I'm the one who is going to guide and dictate and shape the trajectory down the road.
I'd like to ask you, gentlemen, in the last minute that we have left, just a yes or no question, because it seems to be a major sticking point here. The main deal is between the United States and Saudi Arabia. Ambassador, if something goes south with the Palestinians and with Israel, will that deal fall apart?
The Palestinian issue has never been a top priority for Saudi Arabia, certainly not for MBS, and therefore the Palestinian issue will have no bearing on Saudi-Israel relations, and I would say probably even irrespective of the very erroneous State Department policy on the issue.
So, Avi, yes or no?
We'll have to be much more cautious about it. If we are going to have, and that's a possible scenario, if we're going to have some sort of eruption within the Palestinian territories, both in Gaza Strip and in the West Bank, partly as an outcome of a situation where the Palestinians will come to the conclusion that Saudi Arabia is abandoning them, we have to be more cautious about thinking about the ramifications of that. We have to look at it very closely and very carefully.
Cautious optimism. Gentlemen, thank you both very much for your time and your analysis on Zoom In.